The female lead tells women's stories. Remarkable, diverse, inspiring. An educational charity promoting positive female role models who show the many different routes to success and fulfillment.
So often I hear people saying, oh, how do I get started? How do I do this? How do you do it? You just start. You have to begin. And it won't be perfect, and it'll be messy, and it'll be hard. But you're doing something, and you're on your way.
Empowering future generations of women through films and a book of 60 women donated to 18,000 schools in the UK and USA, reaching millions of young people. And through our female lead societies, we help girls to discover new role models that speak to their passions, ambitions and careers. Through our research into social media and mental health, we found a solution to the negative impact of social media on teen girls. Through a simple intervention which encouraged girls to follow different influencers, we were able to change their entire social media experience and sense of well-being. We called this campaign Disrupt Your Feed, and it reached 20 million people on social, with 330 million impressions all over the globe. So what's next? As well as inspiring girls, we're now finding ways to measurably improve the lives of older women through data, research, and the stories of those who have overcome challenges and found their own personal versions of success. We're a long way from being finished. Join us in our mission.
Are we going to talk about women's rights again? Yes, we're going to talk about it until there's balance.
Hi, it's very exciting to welcome you all here today. I am the founder of the Female Lead, Edwina Dunn. It's wonderful to see everyone from all over the world joining us today. It's our first LinkedIn Live, and it's about the really important subject of overcoming imposter syndrome, which I guess we've all experienced at some stage. So to talk about that, I have the very wonderful Rita Clifton to join me today. I'm going to say a few words, Rita, and then we're going to have a chat. So I'm going to tell you about you. Obviously, you know about you, but you are a brand guru from the great and exciting advertising world. You started your career at a time when I think advertising was absolutely the golden place. Became a strategy director and vice chairman at Saatchi & Saatchi in the glory days. I think I remember them myself. But you also had, I think, quite a challenging period as CEO. And of course, now you're chair and NED of various organizations and awarded a CBE in 2014 for services to the creative industries. Congratulations. We're here to talk about your new book, Love Your Imposter, Be Your Best Self, Flaws and All, and it's published today. So Rita, welcome and congratulations.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Edwina. It's just so interesting, you know, when people introduce you and they say this stuff, and of course that immediately triggers the imposter thing already, which is that really me? I mean, it feels almost as though you're being described in the third person, and it does feel, of course, strange, but it's great to be here. I'm a huge admirer of the Female Lead and very much looking forward to talking to people and having some questions and conversations and everything else. So please fire away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And do please share your questions. I'm going to have some help picking them out, and we are going to put those to Rita a little bit later on. But I'm very lucky. I get some time with her alone. So you get my questions. And really, you know, this whole idea of yours, which is let's not fear the imposter syndrome. Let's embrace it. And turn it to a good purpose. Tell us about that very big idea.
Well, it's one of those things where I'm sure, like a lot of people, you know, I have read over the years about struggling with imposter syndrome and overcoming it and so on. And I was talking to someone who is a martial arts expert. I know this sounds very strange because, frankly, I would not know the first thing to do on martial arts, but I was talking to them about the imposter drive and things like that. And I was saying, do you know, occasionally it can be a useful drive. It can be useful because it makes you practice harder, work harder, try harder, stretch yourself. Because frankly, you worried you're going to screw up. And you know, you talk about. I was looking at Meryl Streep early on. There are so many celebrities, actors, business leaders, and so on, who keep on talking about, you know, I think I'm going to get fired on every job. I think I'm going to get fired. And what happens is it drives them. So I was having this conversation with a judo expert, and what they said was, do you know, this reminds me a bit of when you do judo, you're not opposing the other person, you're actually using their weight to overcome them. And I thought that was really interesting. So since then, I have decided that actually I want to recognize my imposter, say, do you know, I know who you are, I recognize you, and actually you're there for a purpose, which is to make me try harder, stretch myself, and practice more. And that, in my view, is a more positive mindset on this whole experience.
So I remember interviewing the wonderful Professor Dame Athene Donald, and she told me, I mean, she's the great physicist, and she told me she had imposter syndrome. And at that point, I thought, you know what, it's probably okay for us all to have a bit of it. If she has it, then frankly, anyone.
Well, as you might have seen, something like 70% of people say that they've experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their working lives. And by the way, that goes up to about 90% in the creative industries. I mean, it ceases to seem like a syndrome, doesn't it? It starts to feel more like a normal part of the human condition. You know,
Yeah.
what makes us human? Some of these concerns and worries and insecurities, these are some things that actually make us human and able to empathize with others. And frankly, I think the world, both the working world and the world at large, I think we all need a little bit more empathy and humanity, don't we? So let's recognize it all in ourselves as well as in others and use it and work with it.
The bit in your book that amused me the most was when you talked about imposter dreams. And I thought, I wondered what that meant. So I don't think we should talk about that, because I think that would be a fun thing for people to discover, because there are some really great bits where I think I suddenly thought, yeah, I never realized that being chased might mean, you know. Anyway, let's not say any more. Let's leave that as a cliffhanger.
Yes.
Now, you also talked about, in perhaps older days terms, princesses and ugly ducklings, or eminent authors or orphans. Sorry, I botched that completely. Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, you mentioned princesses and ducklings, and I mean, this was a piece of research that I sat through, a research debrief, and this was almost 20 years ago, but it's stuck in my mind. And it's stuck in my mind, I think, because I felt some of these things personally. And what the authors of this research study had found is that they'd interviewed a lot of women, successful women, and tried to understand what it was that drove them, some of their background stories and things like that. And they found that, you know, the sample more or less split into two camps. One of the camps was, you know, they called them, you know, princesses, daddy's princesses almost. And this is the group of women who felt adored by their parents, particularly, their fathers, and they grew up thinking that actually that, they were confident and they'd scored goals, and they were almost sort of thinking, what's the problem? Now, actually, there was an issue with some of those princesses later in life because they had such an idealized view of relationships and things like that when they discovered that they had shacked up with a serial infidel, someone who was unfaithful. It was a big shock to them because they thought relationships were perfect. Then there were women who, the study called ugly ducklings, who maybe struggled more when they were growing up. They didn't feel adored by their parents. And in fact, they often felt they were the odd one out in the family, or that they weren't somehow loved as much, etc. And their drive came from a different place. They wanted to prove their parents or one of their parents wrong. And that made them try harder and really work harder to, make the point. And what was interesting there actually is some of these ugly ducklings, grew up actually into being people who wanted to make a hugely positive difference to others because they knew how they'd been treated. So it was an interesting piece of psychology. The terms feel a little bit clumsy for now, but it just stuck in my mind. And you used another, which is the other example that you
what was it called? The eminent orphans.
Orphans, that's right. Well, this is something that the writer Malcolm Gladwell talks about, which is that he looks at how many people, whether business leaders or prime ministers or presidents and so on, had actually lost a parent at an early age. And those people are hugely overrepresented in leaders and political movers and so on. And he felt from his analysis and research that it was because actually that these orphans had to prove themselves or make their own way and things like that. And that sort of gave them a different kind of drive. I mean, that's what happened to me, certainly. I lost my father when I was only 12. And, that was a tragedy. And even though I think probably it has created some drive in me, frankly, I would have forsaken just about anything else to have the parent back. But nevertheless, I recognise that, it did create a certain hunger and a certain need, I suppose, in me. And I think a lot of people that I've spoken to either have lost a parent or otherwise their parents have gone through divorce. They felt a similar kind of drive or need, etc. And again, at some stage in your life, you have to go, do you know, I know where that came. I know where that comes from. I've thought about it. I've talked about it. I've had counselling, or I've had self-development courses and so on. But you have to get to a stage where you recognise you do have drives, and then use that drive in a positive way to help others and to make sure that you, as a very human being, can get to the top of organisations and make it better for other people.
I think that's such a great way of looking at life and, how you can energize yourself. I mean, I sometimes talk about the fact that, I got fired at one stage and thought unfair, unkind, this shouldn't happen. Actually, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it forced me to do something outside of my comfort zone. So, these bad things can be a force for good.
They really can. And you saying that, being fired, it reminded me of one piece of feedback, when we're having our executive reviews and things like that, etc. And I remember once getting a piece of feedback from a male CEO, and I was running a team, and he was talking about what was going well and not so well and things like that. And what he said after some reasonably nice comments was actually, but I think you need to work on your gravitas and your authority, because sometimes you can come across as being a breathless girl. Now, I had to take some deep breaths, as you can imagine, at that. And I was insulted, and I sulked, and I was angry, and frankly, I'd have felt like punching something if I hadn't felt like crying. But having reflected on that, I think one of the reasons why I was so angry about it is because I think I sneakily thought he had a point, because I was used to, in meetings, leaning forward and emoting and waving my hand, being very passionate about things, leaning in. Whereas sometimes when you get to a certain level. You've got to learn to lean back and, you know, allow other people to speak and for you to be the grown-up. And that's not faking it. That is just acknowledging that you are in a different role and you need to practice in that different role and make the best of yourself in that new role. So it's interesting. Sometimes, as we know, things happen for a purpose, whether bad feedback or being fired or whatever it is, use that energy. Oh, Edwina's just gone frozen. Does that mean I've gone frozen too? I do hope not. Hello? I'm hoping that we might get back on. Is this me that hasn't lost it? Hello? I think Edwina is reappearing with any luck. And maybe I will be able to see some questions that people are posing. So if I have to move to a different place. So I can see a question here. So I'll carry on talking while hopefully Edwina comes back, if you can still hear me. But what's interesting about women and imposter syndrome, so even though an average of about 70% of people do say that they experience imposter syndrome, something like 18% more women seem to experience this more than men. And the reasons for that seem to be because, well, firstly, and most obvious thing is women seem to be better at talking about this stuff and being open about it and so on. Also that you know, society slightly contraindicates that women, you know, get to senior roles, etc. And so therefore they can lack the confidence to go into more senior positions over time. And guys, in part, have almost the opposite issue, which is actually sometimes they can be brought up and expected to have more confidence and to achieve more and so on. And sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge for them because they can sometimes suffer from over expectation and overconfidence. And so therefore, actually, you know, they tend to find that they are quite badly, or they are, you know, more badly affected by the impact of imposter syndrome too. So I've got a question here. Did I ever talk to my male colleagues about imposter syndrome? Did they ever feel it themselves? And were they surprised that you experienced it? Well, do you know, funnily enough, just this morning, I was having a conversation with a guy who actually is in his 70s. And I was telling him that I was launching my new book today about Love Your Imposter. And he was telling me that actually he had experienced it himself. And what's more, he had experienced it in a very senior male colleague who actually had unexpectedly been fired one of the days that he had seen them. And that conversation, when the guy had been fired, was vulnerable and open and honest about his feelings and his hurt and so on. This friend of mine said, actually, this changed their relationship. They were suddenly able to have a more honest relationship with each other, a more open relationship and so on. And that really created very different dynamics where, you know, they got to know each other so much better and were able to really engage with each other, and it created a different level of honesty. So in my experience, if you talk to people about this as human beings, whether they're male or female, and actually you reveal something about yourself, like, you know, you're not good at this, or otherwise you experienced this in the past and so on, then actually you can relate to people on a more human level and connect with them in a way that actually, you know, creates richer and better and deeper relationships and recognizes them as human beings. And you can work better and make a more humane company if you have these sort of levels of relationship. So I'm very happy to take the next question. Okay, so thank you. Question from Queenie. How does one stand up for oneself at work without feeling like a rebel? Well, that's very interesting. And it's particularly interesting, I think, when you look at someone like Jacinta Ardern, and by the way, I'm a huge, huge fan of Jacinta Ardern. I think a lot of people are feeling that. In fact, I'm just thinking Jacinta for world president, I think, right at this moment. She would certainly get my vote. And what she talks about is she does not accept the fact that you cannot be strong and kind. And I could not agree more with that. And in fact, what's interesting is one of the chapters of my book is actually entitled Nice Guys Don't Finish Last. And I say that because I'm sure that, like many people, I'm thinking, why is it that there is this myth that somehow you've got to be nasty to get your way? And I think we've got quite a few examples around the world in governments and so on, where people actually believe that to be a bully is to get your own way. You need to be a bully, or you need to be the nasty guy in order to get your way. But in my experience anyway, number one, being nasty and being a bully is a big risk. It's a big and expensive risk in business. And frankly, it's a big and expensive risk in the political world too, because if you get someone to lose face, or if you don't allow someone to retain their dignity, if you push things too far, you can create, as that very famous saying by Gandhi was saying, you can, an eye for an eye creates a blind world. So that's, if you like, putting the mythology to bed that you've got to sort of be tough to get your own way. But your thing about standing up for yourself, I think it's very possible to stand up for yourself for all the right reasons, which is actually, you want to make things better. You want to improve things. And actually that is good. And it's kind to do the right thing. And again, to stand up for yourself and stand up for the company by saying, look, I think this is the right thing. I passionately believe and strongly believe this, and I think this, and I'm going to do this because I think that's the right thing to do for everybody. So I think often it's the way that one says these things, and actually the reason why you're saying it, you want to make things better. So, hello, Edwina. I hope that you've come back.
Hello. I came back on another vehicle. I'm so sorry, but you have so many fabulous questions there that I've left you in very good hands.
There were some great questions.
Anyway, thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Well, there were so many things that I wanted to cover, but I did want to say to people that in your book, there is the most fantastic section on money and understanding the numbers for the boardroom. And I thought it was one of the best explanations that I'd seen. And I really recommend it to people. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Because, you're right, that once you get into the boardroom, you have to speak the language of money, numbers, evidence. And that's what you learned, isn't it?
It is. And what's interesting there is that, I didn't train as an accountant. I wasn't bad at mathematics and so on at school. But what I did find is that, I didn't really have much to do with the language of finance or the language of accountant until I became a chief executive. And of course, if you learn it later in your career and later in life, it's a bit like learning a language. You can learn the language, but you tend to speak with a slightly strange accent, or you get some words wrong and so on. And that's how I felt about finance. But it's absolutely true that in the boardroom, the language tends to be the language of finance, and you need to express your ideas in numbers terms, not because numbers run the world. And certainly, frankly, understanding people and the human condition and what motivates people and so on is crucially important. But the power is putting those things together. Understanding people, understanding what to do and strategy, and putting that together with the substance and the business case that you can have with finance. And that's what makes you powerful. And I think that, I've seen many, many programs, as I think we all have, of, rock stars and celebrities and so on, who just wanted to do the creative thing. They just wanted to write the music or write the books or, make the clothes or whatever. They didn't really want to get involved in the dirty money stuff. And those tend to be the people who end up, penniless or drunk, or they spent all their money or whatever. And the people who got the money were their agents, who knew the legal stuff and knew the finance stuff, and they were the ones who had the great cars and the great houses and everything else, because they ran off with the money because they could manage it. So money gives you leverage and gives you power, and you can use that power to make the kind of decisions and create the kind of business that you want to. And that combination is incredibly strong. And more women need to make sure that they are up with the money, up with the language of money, so that they can take up these top roles. And particularly when you're running, if you want to run a company, and we need so many more women right at the top of organizations. And I don't just mean senior, I mean being CEO and chair and prime minister and director generals, because even if you're very senior, then you still have to cajole or persuade the final decision maker. And I want more women to end up being the final decision makers. And I can almost guarantee that a lot more women are going to be able to do that, and could do it, than are currently putting themselves out there.
I agree totally. And what always you learned it, and that was a discipline. But what always disappoints me is the fact that so many women who actually are naturally very, very good at maths and sciences turn away from it. And actually it can be something that you can combine with other skills, and actually does set you in very good stead for reaching the top of an organization.
Absolutely. And there are many different routes to the top. I was a strategy person that then went into general management. I know many people who've, done marketing and gone into general management and so on. But marketing, being a marketing person, is a case in point, which is that sometimes in the marketing role, you can be caricatured by the person who does the cabaret, or the person who, brings the advertising and so on and so forth. And that makes it even more important from a marketing point of view, that you need to know the numbers, and you need to be able to connect the marketing and the ideas of marketing, the impact of marketing, with the finance of how the total enterprise works. That's where you'll get your leverage, and that's where you get your power, and frankly that's where you get your budgets. And exactly the same in HR. That shows a lot of people, a lot of women will go into the HR function, and learning how to express what you need in financial terms, whatever role you do, is incredibly important. A, to get your way at the time, and secondly, to put yourself in that position, for the future.
Well, you've shared some wonderful advice, and there are so many more brilliant nuggets in your book. I love the ones: be nosy. I always called it being curious. Use rejection as a drive, we talked about. Find something you're good at and follow. We call it follow your passions. So I'm super with
can I just pick that thing up just for a second, Rita? This thing about following your passion, I think it's a really, really interesting thing here, because I think that's true, but there are two other aspects to that. Number one is finding the cause in what you do. So for instance, when I worked for a global brand consultancy, then the cause of what we did was to say, eventually, brands have the power to change the world. That was a motivating cause thing that really did get people motivated. But all I would say is, you do need to follow your passion, but you might not love everything you do every day. Sometimes you might do a role or do a job because you can learn from it and stretch yourself. And I know some self-development courses, some personal development courses talk about you've got to follow your bliss and do things that, like, but we can't all be yoga teachers, or we can't all do those things. And also, we all want to make the biggest impact that we can. And so therefore, sometimes I think it's actually quite powerful to choose a role where you think, I don't know what I'm going to be, I don't know how I'm going to be doing that, but you stretch yourself. When I was CEO, I'm very, honest now about the fact that I didn't really enjoy it that much. It's a relentless job, but once you get to that role, you can make the kind of decisions and you can create the kind of culture and company that you believe in strongly. I had 50-50 men and women on my executive team. It was very well balanced. We had personal bursary programs, we had personal development programs and so on. You can create the kind of culture that you believe is right. And you might not love every day, but it really is incredibly rewarding when you can make that sort of stuff happen. So I would just make that distinction.
No, it's a very, very good point, and beautifully said. Rita, we have to call an end to it. I'm so sorry. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you when I was online, and so glad questions were there when I wasn't. So thank you for being with us. And please, everyone, look to Rita's book, Love Your Imposter, Embrace Your Imposter. Just to say, before I say goodbye, our next LinkedIn Live is with Caroline Britton on the topic of fear to founder. And that's on the 23rd of September, same time, same channel, better tech, I hope. So thank you so much, Rita, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Love your imposter.